Every community across New South Wales suffered from the pandemic of pneumonic or Spanish influenza. While the crisis was short, lasting from January to September 1919, the disease left 6,000 residents dead. After the disruption and tragic losses of World War I, the flu added yet another burden of confusion, suffering and grief. Because about 1 in every 3 people were infected, the flu pandemic is almost certainly a part of your own local and family history. Its extraordinary impact, including the enduring memories held by families and communities, led the Royal Australian Historical Society to create a research guide to help you delve into this intimate pandemic. The booklet can be freely downloaded from the RAHS website. It suggests where to look for local, state and national sources to explore how the flu affected your region. It's divided into 2 sections. The first half discusses primary sources such as archival collections and local sites. The second part summarises many of the published accounts of the flu's impact on Australia and the Pacific. How deeply or widely you want to research the topic is entirely up to you. Whatever your level of interest though, we urge you to share your findings with others through booklets, articles, websites, exhibitions, lectures, walking tours or media stories. Let's dip into a couple of topics that give a flavour of what the records can reveal. In 1919, each local council kept a register of all cases of notifiable infectious diseases occurring within its boundaries. These registers may survive with your local council, historical society, regional collection, or at State Archives and Records in Sydney. In 1919, pneumonic influenza was a notifiable disease, and its dramatic impact could be seen in the way that entries piled up on each other. The former Marrickville Council register seen here, for instance, reveals how record keeping completely broke down under the burden of infection and staff absences. Its rows of information not only list patients and doctors, but also where cases were managed, including in their homes, at established hospitals, or within local emergency hospitals set up in schools, churches or council premises. These details can therefore be used alongside council minutes and local newspaper reports to understand how the community responded to the crisis. Disease registers are also a goldmine for local and family historians, as they detail the milk supply for each infected household and the school that children attended. Who would have thought, for instance, that cases of enteric fever might help you identify local dairies and perhaps even reconstruct their milk runs? And if 4 children of the same age came down with scarlet fever at the local school, can we suggest that they shared a classroom? If you're looking for individual stories, local cemeteries can also reveal the tragic burden that influenza brought down upon our community in 1919. Consider this headstone at Marlee General Cemetery near Port Macquarie. The grave contains the remains of 26-year-old Marion Robinson, who died on the 12th of July 1919. Her obituary in the Northern Champion tells us that Marion was a nurse who contracted pneumonic influenza after volunteering to care for patients at the emergency hospital set up in Wingham. Yet Marion's headstone also records the death of her younger brother Raymond. An artilleryman with the Australian Imperial Force, he died in England just 2 days after the armistice, on the 13th of November 1918. Raymond's World War I service file, held at the National Archives of Australia, reveals that he too died of pneumonic influenza. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission confirms that his body rests in the churchyard of St Mary the Virgin, beside the former military hospital at Harefield, England. Marion and Raymond's shared headstone in Marlee reminds us that half a world away from each other, the same disease took 2 children from widower John Robinson. Spanish flu was truly an intimate pandemic. Reading what others have published can also deepen our understanding of the flu's impact. For instance, the research guide summarises a recent article by Nick Wilson and colleagues, which identified only 7 public memorials to the pandemic across New Zealand. Yet over half of these monuments are devoted to female doctors and nurses who died after contracting flu from their patients. In fact, in St James Church in central Sydney, there's a plaque to Ruby Dickinson, an Australian nurse who died in June 1918 while caring for influenza patients at Harefield Hospital in England. Another paper from the Army Malaria Institute found that Australian artillerymen were far more likely to die from pneumonic influenza than the light horse or infantry. Sources such as these help us put Marion and Raymond Robinson's tragic deaths into a larger perspective. Furthermore, local histories, such as Pauline Kirby's booklet on the effects of the Spanish flu in Ryde, remind us how those dramatic months in 1919 remained vivid in people's memories for a lifetime. At the Royal Australian Historical Society, we encourage you to share your research with others so that together we develop a shared understanding of our history. The influenza pandemic of 1919 cut across local communities, creating millions of small stories of suffering, sacrifice, grief, and recovery. But it also contributed to how our towns, suburbs, and regions dealt with a major public crisis immediately after World War I. By sharing your research into the pandemic with others, we can build a more intimate picture of our society a century ago.